This is Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. Picture the scene, it's early 2008, your boy likes Mario, he likes Sonic, he's only vaguely aware of what an Olympics is, but the allure of a crossover between two of gaming's biggest names was enough to get me to ask for it for my birthday. Critics and gamers alike seem to give it the famous 7 out of 10, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it sold. Well. 5 million copies across its Wii and DS versions in 3 months, well. And certainly well enough to warrant a sequel just 2 years later for the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics. By 2012 we've moved on to the 3DS and Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games, and for whatever reason, Sochi 2014 was only released on the Wii U, and Lord knows I wasn't getting one of them. For Rio 2016 we were back on the 3DS, but by then I discovered YouTube for better or for worse, and my DS glory days were past. And finally, we have Tokyo 2020, released in 2019 for the Nintendo Switch in preparation for the upcoming games, little did they know, all of which begs the question I've taken far too long to meander to. Why was there no Mario and Sonic at the 2018 PyeongChang Winter Olympic Games? At first I thought this would be a simple question that Google could answer in a few minutes. And sure, there were results, we'll get to them later, but oddly, no articles. No Polygon, Kotaku, Eurogamer, IGN, not a one of them had decided that Game Series breaks its biennial streak on what would have been its 10th anniversary was a worthy headline. I even went to the dreaded second page. But by then all the links were barely relevant. This was starting to seem like a conspiracy. I now had 2 questions on my hands. 1, why no game? And 2, why doesn't anyone want to talk about it? It was then that I decided it warranted a video. Let's start with those results. Once you filter out the guy confusing PyeongChang for Pyongyang, awkward, the fan-made wiki entry for a game that doesn't exist, I'm gonna go with satire about how Mario is a terrorist or a drug addict, and the comments that say it's totally gonna come out, trust me bro, all you're really left with is the knowledge that Ubisoft claimed the rights to an Olympic Games game that year. And frankly, that's as useful as the daily governmental COVID briefing.
Well, I'm going to...
Crikey, you can tell how long I've had this script brewing for if that was the freshest reference in my mind. They scrapped that idea over 2 years ago. Look, Ubisoft could claim the rights, EA could claim the rights, hell, Commodore could rise from the grave, open a software division and claim the rights. None of that provides any clue for why they were up for sale to anyone else in the first place. So I think it's time for some baseless speculation. To understand the Mario and Sonic series, one must first understand the 3 main companies involved. All essentially hold vetoing power, so if just one were to pull out, you can kiss goodbye to ever throwing Tails into an infinite void again. First is the International Olympic Committee itself, or, more specifically, International Sports Multimedia, the company that deals with licensing the Olympics to be used in games, and mostly games actually, so it says multimedia and more single medium, but whatever. Weirdly, their site only goes back to 2012, but I don't think that particularly matters here. You can see on the site that for 2018, the official licensed product was Ubisoft's Steep, which is a game I actually own, and refuse to show any footage of until Yves Guillemot resigns. Also, I don't want to install a 30GB game for 2 seconds of footage, man, come on. I own it because Ubisoft were giving it away for free to try and stimulate interest in their other games, and that's not exactly the sign of a game that's doing the numbers. And to make matters worse, the product was not the game itself, but rather DLC, which just by its nature would have sold even fewer copies. Surely Ubisoft didn't put in a higher bid than Sega only to squander their license on a single DLC. Maybe they still made their money back, on that point I can't be sure, but it doesn't seem like the smartest of moves on Ubi's part, and it makes me question quite why ISM picked them over its far safer tried and tested bet. I reckon that this was a decision made not by choice, but rather by necessity, when either Sega or Nintendo pulled out. So, speaking of Nintendo, there had been some suggestion that Nintendo as a Japanese company, much like Sega, weren't all too happy about making a game set in South Korea, given Japan's history with the latter country, and this could certainly have had an influence. But I can't help finding it unlikely, seeing as Japan competed as a country in said Olympics. Nintendo is a business, their primary motivator isn't politics, it's money. If their government was fine with sending athletes, I can't imagine Nintendo would have wanted to miss out on all the eyes on their mascot, and also, possibly, more money. All the very limited sources I can find say that they happily embodied the spirit of the Olympics, allowing Sega to use their characters for free, in exchange for the promotion and also under the condition that they'd send over Shigeru Miyamoto to make sure that they were being used the right way, but I imagine it a little more like, I receive famous characters to bolster the appeal of our game, you receive money. That meme is going to be hideously out of date by the time this video goes live. I apologise. So finally, we come to Sega. They're the ones who actually developed the games and are obviously responsible for the Sonic characters. What possible reasons could they have had for not wanting to make a game that year? Well,
Money!
while the first game sold well, it's harder to find sales figures for the rest, and it's possible that they started to drop off after a decade of variations on what was essentially the same game. By 2018, it could have been time for a rest for making a game that year in favour of getting more to grips with the newly released Switch in order to come back swinging with Tokyo, a game that was predicted to sell substantially better just because of its associations with Japan, the home of both Mario and Sonic. There is also the stronger case to be made that Sega were the ones who pulled out, as they've been happy to make Olympic games without Mario in the past. Sonic at the Olympic Games is the name of two mobile games, the first released in 2008 and the second in 2020. Sure, you've never heard of them, but they exist. Mario might come first in the title, but if he were to call it quits, the series may yet survive. If Sega pulls out, then there's nobody to make games at all. But none of this answers why it wasn't reported on by any gaming news site. And for that one, I just don't know.